We're taught to see the age of exploration as one of humanity's greatest achievements, a story of courage, discovery, and empire. But rarely do we ask a simple question. What happened to the sailors who were sent to sea? If you were to go without fresh vegetables and fruits for 3 months, gnawing on hard biscuits like stones every day and drinking water that smells foul, how long do you think you could last? Let me know your answer in the comments. In October 1741, London was eerily quiet in the late night, with only the dim light of street lamps illuminating the dilapidated old tenements in the Southwark district. Suddenly, a loud banging on the door shattered the silence as the Royal Navy's press gang burst in, their clubs banging against the doorframe. All men who can steer or sail, come out. The sailors in the room trembled in fear. They had committed no crime, yet they were to be forcibly taken aboard a warship. This was a common sight in England at the time. You might ask, why did no one volunteer to be a sailor? The answer is simple. The reputation of the Royal Navy was rotten to the core. First, punishments were arbitrary. Flogging on board was a daily occurrence, and any slight breach of discipline could result in being tied to the mast and whipped dozens of times, with severe injuries being the norm. Second, the pay was pitiful. Sailors earned a meager £2 a month, often subject to deductions by officers, and sometimes they wouldn't receive their wages for years after returning from a voyage. Most terrifying of all were the long-standing, horrific food legends. On board, one might not die in battle at sea, but rather from hunger, disease, or inedible food. Among sailors at the time, there was a saying, "Going on board is like entering a grave, and eating is like eating poison." Many forcibly conscripted sailors would secretly hide a small knife before boarding, not for self-defense, but in case of a shipwreck, to quickly end their lives and avoid the torment of starving or dying from illness. Just think about it. What a desperate situation it must be for people to prefer suicide over facing life on a ship. In fact, behind this press gang system was the struggle for maritime supremacy among nations during the age of exploration. Countries like England, Spain, and Portugal needed a large number of sailors to navigate merchant ships and warships across the oceans. But the harsh sailing conditions made being a sailor a high-risk profession, with very few volunteers, forcing them to rely on conscription to fill their ranks. Most of these forcibly taken sailors were low-level laborers and fishermen, and from the moment they stepped onto the ship, their fates were left to the sea and that deadly food. The sailing ship you are on has been adrift at sea for 3 months and 20 days, and the last piece of fresh bread was consumed a month ago. Now, you hold a hard biscuit in your hand. As you bring it close to your nose, a stench of rat urine assaults your senses. Breaking it open reveals it is crawling with white weevils, and several black-headed maggots are wriggling inside. This is the daily staple of sailors during the age of exploration. 500 years ago, there were no refrigerators, no vacuum packaging, and not even decent preservation techniques. Once the sailing ship left port and drifted away from land supplies, fresh food began to rot rapidly. To make food last until the return journey, the crew could only use the most basic methods, dehydration and salting. However, these methods could only extend the shelf life of food, not guarantee its edibility. The main staples for sailors were black bread and hard biscuits, both characterized by being hard, dry, and long-lasting. First, let's talk about hard biscuits. Their production process is nothing short of minimalist, mixing flour, water, and salt evenly, kneading repeatedly, then baking, dehydrating, and air-drying in the oven, sometimes requiring several rounds of baking until the biscuits become as hard as stones. Why make them so hard? because only with a sufficiently dense texture can moisture be reduced, preventing rapid mold growth in the damp ship's hold. However, eating these hard biscuits was a form of torture. Before eating, sailors had to soak them in rum, beer, or foul-smelling fresh water for half an hour to soften them slightly. Otherwise, a single bite could easily break their teeth. Records show that 16th-century Spanish sailors often carried a small wooden mallet to crush the biscuits into crumbs during meals, which they would then mix with water to swallow. Even more absurdly, in emergencies, these hard biscuits could be used as weapons. During the Anglo-Spanish War in 1588, British sailors reportedly threw hard biscuits at boarding Spanish soldiers, stunning several of them. But that wasn't the worst of it. When a sailing ship drifted at sea for over a month, the humid, stuffy, and poorly ventilated environment in the hold would cause the biscuits to absorb moisture and soften. At this point, the bugs hiding in the gaps of the oak barrels would come out. Weevils, black-headed maggots, cockroaches. They would burrow into the biscuits, devouring the edible parts and leaving behind only remnants full of holes. But sailors had long since become accustomed to this, and they would even consider the bugs as a protein supplement. A seasoned sailor from the 17th century wrote in his diary, "The elephant beetle tastes a bit bitter, but when crushed, it has a faint nutty flavor. The black-headed maggot is cool and has a texture similar to jelly, with no strange taste. The biggest surprise is the cockroach, which, when roasted, tastes like a mini sausage, a rare delicacy." Family members, are you getting goosebumps hearing this? But for sailors at that time, having bugs to eat was better than going hungry. If the biscuits ran out, they would even catch rats and seagulls on the ship to fill their stomachs, sometimes not even sparing the moss on the wooden planks. Now let's talk about black bread, which is made from coarse rye flour, often mixed with sand, pebbles, and even ground wood chips, because millers would add these to increase weight. The land version of black bread is already quite dry, but the ocean version is even worse. To extend its shelf life, bakers would reduce moisture, baking it to a hard, charred state, requiring soaking before eating. Some sailors joked, "Our black bread can be used for paving roads or as ship planks, but it can't be eaten directly." If the staple food is essential for survival, then the side dishes are the sailors' source of protein. But these two types of protein are even harder to swallow than the staple food. The first type is salted meat, usually made from pork or beef. To ensure the salted meat can be stored for months, a lot of salt is used, so much that if a piece of salted meat is soaked in water for a day, the water is still bitterly salty. When eating, sailors can only slice the salted meat thinly and rinse it repeatedly with fresh water. Even so, it still feels like it's scratching their throats, requiring a lot of water to alleviate the discomfort. Even more frightening is the issue of spoiled salted meat. Even with a lot of salt in the humid ship's cabin, salted meat can still slowly rot, developing green mold on the surface and emitting a sour smell. But sailors had no choice. They could only cut off the moldy parts and eat the remaining portions. If they were unlucky enough to eat severely spoiled salted meat, they would get diarrhea, which, on a ship with limited medical supplies, could lead to dehydration and ultimately death. The second type of side dish is dried cod, which is a standard for sailors navigating northern waters. The method of making dried cod involves catching the fish, removing the entrails, salting it, and then hanging it on the deck to sun-dry. After this treatment, the dried cod is as hard as an iron plate, making a clang sound when struck against a ship's nail. Before eating, sailors need to chop the dried cod into small pieces with an axe and soak it in warm water for a whole day just to be able to chew it. Moreover, dried cod has a very fishy taste, with a salty fishy flavor, causing many sailors to feel nauseous and vomit after eating it, but they had to force themselves to swallow it to supplement their protein intake. During the Age of Exploration, the most scarce resource on ships was not food, but fresh water. Each ship would carry a large amount of fresh water stored in huge oak barrels, but this fresh water often spoiled in less than 2 weeks. This was because the oak barrels had gaps, allowing seawater to seep in, and combined with the high temperature and humidity in the cabin, bacteria and green algae would quickly grow in the barrels, creating a layer of slimy foam on the surface that smelled like a sewer and turned a murky yellow. Sailors had a strict rule: you can eat anything, but you must not drink bad water. Drinking spoiled fresh water leads to only one outcome: dysentery. Imagine being on a rocking ship with no clean toilets and no effective medicine. Once you get dysentery, you would have to go dozens of times a day, quickly leading to dehydration and weakness, ultimately dying in agony. Records show that on a Portuguese merchant ship in the 16th century, due to spoiled fresh water, 12 out of 30 sailors died of dysentery, and the remaining ones were all extremely weak, barely making it back home. To make fresh water somewhat drinkable, sailors came up with a method: mixing it with alcohol. Rum, brandy, and beer were common choices. Alcohol could kill some bacteria, serving as a disinfectant and also mask the foul smell of spoiled fresh water. At that time, the British Royal Navy provided sailors with a daily ration of 1 gallon of beer, which was later replaced with rum because beer was difficult to store. Sailors would mix rum and fresh water in a 1:4 ratio to make rum-infused fresh water, which, although still unpleasant to drink, at least wouldn't cause immediate poisoning. However, this also led to new problems. Some sailors would secretly hide rum and drink it all when no one was watching, resulting in drunken brawls on deck, falling overboard and drowning, or causing fires. To prevent this, officers would personally supervise the sailors while they drank, sometimes mixing the rum and fresh water beforehand to ensure no one could drink pure alcohol alone. If you think the scariest enemies for sailors during the Age of Exploration were the unappetizing food and foul-smelling fresh water, you are mistaken. The real Grim Reaper at sea was a disease caused by nutritional deficiency, scurvy. This disease claimed the lives of at least 2 million sailors between the 15th and 17th centuries, more than the total number of deaths in all naval battles combined. The symptoms of scurvy are nothing short of a slow-motion execution. In the early stages of the disease, sailors experience fatigue and swollen gums. Next, the gums begin to ulcerate and bleed, teeth become loose and fall out, and even slight pressure while eating causes the gums to bleed profusely. Then, large areas of bruising appear under the skin, and even a gentle touch can result in painful purple spots. Wounds fail to heal, and even a small scratch can continue to bleed and become infected. In the later stages, joints experience severe pain, the body gradually becomes paralyzed, and ultimately, one dies in extreme agony. Throughout this entire process, there is no medication that can provide relief. One can only watch helplessly as their body deteriorates step by step. Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe is a bloody history of scurvy. In 1519, Magellan set sail with 268 crew members, their ship loaded with hardtack, salted meat, and fresh water, but lacking any fresh vegetables or fruits. By the second year of the voyage, scurvy began to spread among the crew. One by one, the sailors fell ill, their gums rotting to the point where they could not eat, surviving only on small amounts of fresh water, and many ultimately starved to death. By 1522, when the fleet finally returned to Europe, only 18 crew members remained, while the other 250 had mostly died from scurvy. The fleet's secretary, Antonio Pigafetta, recorded this scene in detail in his sailing diary. Many people on board had gums swollen like sponges, a deep brown color, and they could not chew food, only drinking thin gruel. Some had lost all their teeth, their cheeks sunken, looking like skeletons. We buried our companions every day, and the deck was covered in blood and pus. The smell was nauseating. This passage still sends chills down the spine today. Why was scurvy so rampant? Because people at the time had no idea of its cause. Before the 18th century, the medical community generally believed that scurvy was caused by poor sanitary conditions in the ship's hold, leading to the production of putrid gases, or that the sailors' blood had deteriorated. Therefore, the treatments at the time were varied. Some suggested that sailors get more sunlight, others recommended bloodletting, and some even burned vinegar in the hold for disinfection. But none of these methods were effective and instead led to more deaths. It wasn't until 1747 that a naval doctor named James Lind conducted a groundbreaking experiment. At that time, there were 12 scurvy patients on the ship where Lind served. He divided these 12 men into 6 groups of 2, providing them with the same daily diet, and then supplemented each group with different foods. The first group received oranges and lemons, the second group received apple juice, the third group received vinegar, the fourth group received seawater, the fifth group received garlic and mustard, and the sixth group received laxatives. The results of the experiment shocked everyone. Within just 6 days, the 2 crew members who consumed oranges and lemons no longer had bleeding gums, regained their strength, and were able to get out of bed to work. Meanwhile, the patients in the other groups showed no improvement, and 2 even worsened. Lind finally discovered that fresh citrus fruits were the key to treating scurvy. However, this discovery was not immediately adopted by navies around the world. Why? Because the cost was too high. Fresh oranges and lemons were quite expensive at the time and difficult to store, making it a huge expense to provide them to thousands of sailors. Naval officers believed that it was better to spend money on hardtack and salted meat rather than fruit, as being full was more important than eating well. What truly changed the Navy's perspective was the 7 Years' War, 1756–1763. During this war, over 100,000 crew members of the British Navy died from disease, with 90% being scurvy patients, while fewer than 10,000 died in battle. The horrific loss of life forced the British Navy to take Lind's discovery seriously. In 1795, the British Navy officially ordered that sailors be given a daily ration of 3–4 ounces of lemon or orange juice. From then on, the number of British sailors suffering from scurvy plummeted, earning them the nickname limeys. Later it was discovered that, in addition to oranges and lemons, foods such as malt extract used in brewing beer, horseradish, and sauerkraut could also prevent scurvy. Although these foods were not very palatable, they were easy to store and inexpensive, quickly becoming standard provisions for navies around the world. Thus, the death on the high seas, which had tormented sailors for nearly 4 centuries, was finally repelled. By the end of the 17th century, with innovations in navigation technology and the establishment of financial systems, the logistics of long-distance voyages greatly improved. The design of sailing ships became increasingly advanced, with larger storage spaces in the holds that could carry more food and fresh water. At the same time, governments increased their financial investment in the Navy, providing enough funds to improve sailors' rations. Among them, the British Royal Navy had the most luxurious provisions. In 1677, the British Navy established detailed ration standards, leading to a qualitative leap in the quality of sailors' food. Each day, every sailor could receive 1 pound of hardtack and 1 gallon of beer. Each week, they could receive 8 pounds of salted beef, 2 pounds of bacon or pork, and 2 pints of peas. This rationing standard was considered a luxury package at the time. It's worth noting that the daily living expenses of an ordinary British worker were only a few pence, while sailors not only had enough to eat, but also had meat and beer. In addition to fixed rations, warships also actively supplement their food supplies. Many warships are equipped with fishing nets, and in good sea conditions near shore, sailors will catch fish to replenish their stock of fish meat. Sometimes, with a bit of luck, they can even catch sharks, dolphins, and sea turtles, adding some sea flavors to their diet. These fresh fish will be cooked immediately, allowing sailors to enjoy rare fresh food. Moreover, as the deck area of sailing ships expands, sailors can purchase live livestock and fresh vegetables in port towns along the way, such as chickens, ducks, pigs, potatoes, and cabbages. Once these livestock are brought on board, they are kept in pens on the deck, becoming a mobile meat store. They can lay eggs and produce milk, and when food is scarce, they can be slaughtered for consumption. At the same time, these animals also become sailing pets for the sailors, providing a bit of comfort during the monotonous long voyages. There is also an interesting tradition of sailing pets. Living far from land and isolated from the world, sailors lead very monotonous lives, and many suffer from loneliness and stress, leading to mental breakdowns and madness. To alleviate these emotions, the Navy gradually formed a tradition of keeping pets. Warships not only keep livestock like chickens, ducks, and pigs, but also pets like dogs, cats, and parrots. Some warships even register pets as military personnel and grant them ranks, with the Navy allocating special funds to provide military expenses for pets, which is essentially the cost of buying food. Records show that on a British Royal Navy warship in the 19th century, there was a cat named Nelson who was awarded the rank of lieutenant for catching mice and was allowed to dine with the officers every day. On another warship, a parrot that could mimic the captain's commands was regarded as a mascot by the sailors, and before each voyage, everyone would have the parrot say a good luck phrase. These pets not only served as a spiritual support for the sailors, but also improved the cabin environment to some extent. For example, cats catching mice helped prevent them from stealing food and spreading diseases. However, the British Navy had a rather amusing regulation at the time. Sailors were forced to eat German sauerkraut, and those who refused faced flogging as punishment. The reason sailors were reluctant to eat it was that German sauerkraut was notoriously unpalatable. The European version of sauerkraut originated in Prussia in the 13th century and is made by shredding cabbage and fermenting it with salt and wine. However, cabbage is rich in sulfur, which releases a strong, smelly foot odor during fermentation, making it hard for many to accept. The British Navy enforced this because they discovered that German sauerkraut could prevent scurvy. Although people at the time did not know about the existence of vitamin C, they found through practice that sailors who frequently ate sauerkraut had a much lower probability of developing scurvy. Therefore, even if the sailors were unwilling, they had to grit their teeth and eat it. After all, compared to flogging and scurvy, the unpleasant smell was nothing. Also recruited by the British Navy was inferior orange juice. This orange juice was made from low-quality citrus fruits bought from the Sicilian mafia, and it had a sour and bitter taste. However, because it was rich in vitamin C and could prevent scurvy, it also became a part of the sailors' daily rations. Although these foods were not palatable, they played a crucial role in protecting the lives of sailors. Although people discovered in the 18th century that fresh fruits and vegetables could prevent scurvy, it wasn't until 1932 that humanity truly understood the hero behind it. That year, American scientist Charles Glenn King isolated a crystalline substance from lemon juice and proved through guinea pig experiments that this substance was key to preventing and treating scurvy. Because this substance is essential for life and water-soluble, it was named vitamin C, abbreviated as VC. With the development of molecular biology, people's understanding of VC has deepened. It turns out that VC not only prevents scurvy, but is also a powerful antioxidant that can eliminate free radicals in the body and slow down aging. Additionally, it is a necessary cofactor for collagen synthesis, which is an important component of skin, bones, and blood vessels. A lack of VC can lead to skin laxity, osteoporosis, and slow wound healing. Furthermore, VC can help boost immunity, assisting the body in resisting viruses and bacterial invasions. This is why doctors recommend increasing VC intake during flu season. However, before the 1990s, VC was not the cheap product it is today, costing just a few dollars a bottle. Instead, it was a cash cow monopolized by three major companies. At that time, Swiss Roche, German BASF, and Japanese Takeda held the core production technology for VC, the Reich process. This method was complex and costly, and it produced a large amount of pollutants during production, so the price of VC remained high, reaching as much as $18 per kilogram wholesale. At that time, the price of a bottle of VC tablets was equivalent to several days' wages for an ordinary worker, making it unaffordable for the average person. It was not until the late 1960s to the 1970s that China developed the two-step fermentation method. This method uses glucose as the raw material and directly produces VC precursors through the synergistic action of two microorganisms. After a simple chemical transformation, high-purity VC can be obtained. Compared to the traditional Lay's method, the two-step fermentation method has three major advantages. First, it is more cost-effective, with a raw material utilization rate increased by over 30%, and a significant reduction in energy consumption and pollutant emissions during the production process. Second, it is safer, as it does not require the use of toxic and harmful chemical reagents during production, resulting in higher product purity. Third, the process is simpler and easier to scale up for production. This technological breakthrough has led to an explosive increase in VC production. Although we no longer need to worry about scurvy like sailors in the age of exploration, VC remains crucial for our health. 500 years ago, sailors suffered from scurvy due to a lack of VC, which hovered like a ghost over every ship on long voyages, claiming the lives of millions of sailors. It wasn't until Dr. James Lind used 2 lemons to unveil the secret to preventing scurvy, and later Charles Glenn King discovered vitamin C, that Chinese scientists developed the two-step fermentation method, bringing VC into the homes of many. Each of these steps embodies human wisdom and courage. Today, scurvy has long disappeared with the improvement of long-distance sailing conditions and advancements in food preservation technology. But humanity's quest for health has never ceased. The boundaries of understanding VC continue to be pushed, and its forms are constantly evolving, from small white tablets to convenient drinks, gummies, and various functional foods. Each transformation marks a precious footprint left by humanity in the journey of combating the unknown and pursuing quality of life.